All right. So there have been some devastating losses throughout the history of any program,
Sure.
focusing on UCLA. What maybe still stings a little bit, Tony?
There are many, and I may not get the years exactly correct, but there are some where the UCLA fans are going to remember the games I'm talking about. And some of these were at the Coliseum with the old SC UCLA games. Norm Johnson having a field goal blocked by Georgia Chica of USC in the closing seconds of a game that UCLA would have won and would have sent them to the Rose Bowl. I know a lot of UCLA fans are still waiting for Eric Aftholder to actually catch the ball in the corner of the end zone and stop bobbling it. Again, I don't remember the specific years, but those specific memories. Rick Neuheisel's last USC UCLA game, because it was 50-0 in the all-white uniforms, which have become known as the surrender uniforms if you're a UCLA fan, was just humiliating, because it's one thing to lose like that. It's another thing to lose like that to USC. I know we've talked about the rivalry before. The two schools are 12 miles apart from each other. And when you live in LA, there is no avoiding the other school the rest of the year. It's not like you're half a state away, you're not even half a city away. And so when you lose like that to your rival, and you can't even go to a movie theater in your own neighborhood without seeing the USC shirts, and the kind of knowing glare, and things like that. That was one of the most brutal losses I can when you cover the team and you can't even stand watching the rest of the game, it was pretty bad.
And to have to suffer the brutality of that 50-0 loss, and then, if I remember correctly, go to the Pac-12 championship game the next week.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and you sitting there kind of like, what's the point?
After not legitimately winning the
Right,
division.
right. USC wasn't eligible. USC wasn't eligible to go, and so UCLA backed into it. And yeah, it was pretty brutal. You can see the theme, though, that most of the games that stick in your memory, or in this case stick in your craw, in terms of the losses, have to do with the rivalry game, have to do with the crosstown showdown, because those are the ones that tend to last the longest and sting the most.
Mark Rogers TV, kicking around UCLA football with Tony Siracusa from Last Word on College Football. Tony, let's tee this one up. Your favorite player of all time, your favorite Bruin ever.
Wow. That's a tough one. I will tell you
If you
that
need to make a list, that's fine. You need to run down a few if you can't
you know what?
separate them.
You know what? I'm gonna some of these are gonna surprise people because they're not the most obvious. Everyone's gonna say, "Oh, you got to have Troy Aikman on the list." Yeah, Aikman's fine, but you know what? If you're a UCLA fan, you also admit Aikman was 0-2 against USC, so there's an asterisk there. Matt Darby, who was a defensive back at UCLA and a linebacker, just one of the most ferocious hitters in the game, was spectacular. And Jerry Robinson was one of my favorite, the first 3-time consensus All-American in college football history. Just an awesome player to watch. One of the nicest guys you'll ever meet, up close and personal, was Jonathan Ogden. Just completely humble for someone who was as skilled as he was, even at the college level. Of course, he became an NFL Hall of Famer, but even at the college level, he really was that good. And just a completely humble, nice guy. There's a jersey behind me that is an actual game worn jersey from Raheem Moore. Now, I know Denver Bronco fans are cringing at the even thought of Raheem Moore, and I get that. But when my daughter started going to games with us when she was really young, he became her favorite player. They met at one of the spring practices, and over time, a friend of a friend told Raheem Moore that my daughter, really liked him. He was her favorite player. That Christmas, she got that delivered to her from him, and it's an actual game-worn jersey with the tears and the rips and everything. So for someone to pay that much attention to a young, up-and-coming fan, he'll always have a special place, with the Bruins as well. Cade McNown, didn't really like him off the field as much, kind of had things going on with, parking scandal and other such things off field. But if you're a Bruin fan, you acknowledge that he was 4-0 against SC and rode the Bruins to a 20-game winning streak. So I got to know Bruce Davis over the years, went on to play with the Steelers for a while as well. And Bruce was a terrific guy. So I think some of them, they were favorite players for what they did on the field, like a McNown, like an Aikman. There are other guys that, covering the team or even just having the chance off the field to meet some of them. You really grow to like them. There was a wide receiver that I grew to like in the late 90s, Danny Farmer. There was nothing spectacular about Danny Farmer's game. Really nothing. He was actually a better college volleyball player than he was a football player. But the guy gave every bit of effort on every route he ever ran in his career. So it was great to watch somebody like that play, someone who, he kind of went from, he's in the lineup to Cade McNown's go-to receiver in 98. It was fun to watch somebody like that play. So those are some of the favorites.
Tony, that's the beauty of this conversation, because for as much as I love to debate the all-time greats, there's a metric there that you have to use. And of course, there's still a great debate. The stats don't tell everything, but you have to be able to defend, if we're having this same conversation, player, coach, but you're tacking on best or greatest, then you have to defend that. But If we're just kicking around favorite, there's nothing to debate there.
It's a subjective conversation, and you can go in any direction.
Absolutely. And there's usually an interesting story there, because like you, my favorites for any particular team aren't necessarily the best players. There's just something about their personality, their effort, their style that just kind of draws you to particular people, and you don't have to defend, again, a favorite. Now, when we talk best, and we'll do that at a later date, then we can go toe-to-toe possibly, although I'm not going to match you on UCLA football history. So favorite coach, I made a bit of a disparaging remark about Jim Mora a few minutes ago. Now, of course, he had a fair run at UCLA, 6 years, one top 10 finish, did not fulfill expectations, but not all bad there for Jim Mora. But when we look at your favorite all-time UCLA head coach,
that's actually probably the hardest question. The team was fun and exciting during the good part of the Bob Toledo era, but there was also a little bit of an underbelly that helped get Toledo shown the door. Carl Durrell, nice guy, couldn't coach. Rick Neuheisel, fun guy, not a good coach. And I was one of the guys at the beginning who said he was the wrong hire. Jim Mora, it was fine. Obviously too soon to say Chip Kelly, but look, I mean, if you're a UCLA fan, obviously most people are going to say Terry Donahue because he's the winningest coach in UCLA history and the conference. But I actually like Dick Vermeil when he was coaching, just because he was so emotional about the game. Sometimes people would mock him for the emotion, but he put so much of himself into every game and everything he did, and his coaching and his teaching, that even though I was really young when Vermeil was at UCLA, I was a Vermeil fan, and even long after he was gone, even after he went to the Eagles, I was a Dick Vermeil fan.
Select any football coach, and it seems as though if you can count the number of times that they became outwardly emotional, and obviously I'm being redundant there, that's what the word means, to emote, but in a very demonstrative way, it's usually the answer is 0 or 1 for just about any football coach that I can think of. And that one time is typically the end of a career or a tenure at a particular stop. But for
Sure.
Dick Vermeil, we run out of hands in counting the times that he was emotional in front of the cameras.
That was who he was, and that was him being real. And he but when you would get the chance to meet him and to talk with him and talk about certain players or talk about certain games, and I'm not even talking about back then when he was doing it. I've had the chance to do it, decades later. He still, you could see that sparkle in his eye when it would come to talking about certain games. He left after the 76 Rose Bowl. That was it for him. And that's when he turned it over to Terry Donahue. But there were certain games that you could talk about that weren't even necessarily the highlight games, but just games where there was a connection with him that you could see that it just meant so much to him, even all these decades later.
The thing about Donahue, just looking at the sheer black and white of the metrics and the coaching record, there are very few guys out there that he certainly had much better than a marginal run. He had a very, very good record, but his big wins trump his overall excellence. His winning percentage isn't that outstanding, but to get to Rose Bowls and win them every time, that's pretty outstanding.
Yeah, you know what? Wow, I think that's a great point. I think that nails the Donahue era in a nutshell. I mean, his overall winning percentage was really kind of pedestrian. There were a couple of years where he's going to the Rose Bowl with a 6-4 record. It was the Pac-8 for much of his coaching career. And you're kind of backing in the last week of the season when you need a win and you need 3 other teams to lose, and it happens. And the next thing you're going to the Rose Bowl. But on the other hand, he won 3 straight Rose Bowls during that era. He beat Iowa, he beat Michigan, he beat Illinois, all with really good quarterbacks back then. And so there was something to be said. He went for a period where he won 7 straight bowl games. That's not easy to do even back then. So yeah, it was those big wins that really kind of encapsulate the Donahue era, and that way it allows you to kind of overlook wow, we had a chance to be number 1 but lost to Arizona, in the closing minutes of a game, and whatever 1985 or whatever, because there was always the years that Donahue had a chance to have a top 5 team, and there would be a collapse late in the season that would prevent it. The UCLA fans will prefer to remember the 7 bowl games in a row that he won instead.
The bowl streak's impressive, maybe even more so then, if you look at it this way, with 12 to 15 bowl games, something in that range, you're always playing one of the 25 or 30 best teams in the country.
Sure.
As opposed to now.
Sure. Look, hey, he beat a Bernie Kosar-led Miami team in the Fiesta Bowl with Gaston Green, going off for some 200 and whatever yards. They beat good teams in the bowl games, and he could always get them up to play those games.
All right, Tony Siracusa from Last Word on College Football on the line to talk UCLA football. Tony, we always have a good time with the discussion, and always appreciate it as well.
Always glad to do it, Mark.